I was 30 seconds away from changing my husband's life forever. I had a folder in my hands. Inside it was a letter from a law firm, a certified check number, and my late grandmother's signature on a will that named me the sole heir to $35 million. I was sitting across from a notary, ready to sign the last page, the page that would make it official, the page that would let me walk out of that office and go home and tell my husband, Daniel, that our lives were about to change forever. And then the notary looked up from her screen, and her face changed. "Ma'am," she said slowly, "I'm sorry, but our records show your divorce was finalized 2 months ago." I froze. Not for 1 second. Not for 2. For 5 full seconds, I could not speak, could not breathe, could not understand the words that had just come out of her mouth. Because as far as I knew, I was still married. I had made breakfast for my husband that morning. I had kissed him goodbye. I had no idea that somewhere, on some piece of paper, our marriage no longer existed. 5 seconds of silence. And then I made my move. But to understand why that moment broke me, and why what I did next was the smartest thing I have ever done, you need to go back 6 months, to the day everything started to unravel. My name is Claire. I was 41 years old, married to Daniel for 14 years. We had built a quiet, comfortable life together. Not rich, not poor. A house with a small garden. 2 kids in middle school. A marriage that, on the surface, looked steady. Daniel worked in finance. I ran a small design studio from home. We weren't the couple people gossiped about at parties. We were the couple people pointed to and said, "See, it can last." I believed that too. I believed it with my whole heart. My grandmother, Eleanor, was the only family I had left on my mother's side. She was sharp, funny, and fiercely private about money. Nobody knew she had spent 40 years quietly investing in real estate and small businesses. Nobody knew, until she passed away, that her estate was worth $35 million. And nobody knew, until her lawyer called me, that she had left every single cent of it to me. Not to Daniel. Not split between us. To me, alone, with a letter attached that said something I would only understand much later. "Claire, keep this close until you know exactly who deserves to stand beside you when it arrives." At the time, I thought that was just my grandmother being her usual careful self. I had no idea she was warning me. I didn't tell Daniel right away. The estate had to clear probate. Lawyers needed months to finalize everything. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, a calm dinner, a quiet evening, some perfect scene where I could tell my husband we were about to become unimaginably wealthy. I never once imagined that while I was waiting for the right moment, he was building an entirely different plan of his own. Looking back now, the signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. Daniel started working later. He said it was a big project at the office. He started taking calls in the garage with the door shut. He said it was a stressful client. He started leaving his phone face down on the counter, something he had never done in 14 years of marriage. I asked him once, gently, if everything was okay between us. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Claire, I've never been happier. Trust me." And I did. That's the part that still stings the most. I trusted him completely. There was a woman named Patricia who worked with him. He mentioned her name more than once, always wrapped in something professional. "Patricia and I are handling the Morrison account. Patricia thinks we should restructure the proposal." Just a name in the background of his stories. I had no reason to think it meant anything. Meanwhile, my grandmother's estate was moving through the legal process. I met with lawyers. I signed preliminary documents. And every single time, I told the lawyers not to send anything to our home address because I wanted this to be a surprise for Daniel. I wanted to hand him the news myself, wrapped in love, not in paperwork. What I didn't know was that Daniel had already stopped thinking of our marriage as something to protect. He had already met with a divorce attorney. He had already begun quietly moving pieces into place while I was still planning the perfect moment to make him the happiest man alive. It was a Tuesday evening when I found the first real clue. I was looking for a stapler in Daniel's home office drawer, something completely ordinary, and instead I found a folder labeled Personal, Do Not Touch. I almost didn't open it. Almost. But something in my gut told me to look. Inside were documents from a law office. Divorce filing paperwork. Dated 3 months earlier. My signature was on some of the pages, except I had never signed them. My name was there, but the handwriting was slightly off, just enough that if you weren't looking closely, you'd never notice. My hands were shaking as I read further. Daniel had filed for divorce using a version of my signature that was forged. He had listed our assets, our house, our savings, everything, and divided them in a way that heavily favored him. There was a separate document, a settlement he had prepared, listing Patricia's name as a beneficiary on a life insurance policy he had recently taken out. Not our children. Patricia. I sat on the floor of that office for almost an hour, staring at those papers, piecing together a truth I never wanted to see. My husband, the man I had built 14 years with, was not just cheating on me. He was legally erasing me from our marriage, quietly, methodically, using a fake signature, timed perfectly so it would all be finished before I told him about the inheritance. Because here's the part that broke my heart the most. Somehow, Daniel already knew about the money. I never told him, but someone had. It took me 2 more days of quiet digging to understand how Daniel knew about my grandmother's fortune before I ever said a word. My grandmother's lawyer, a man named Mr. Whitfield, had an assistant who handled scheduling and paperwork. That assistant, it turned out, was married to someone who worked at the same finance firm as Daniel. Small world, terrible coincidence, and Daniel had used it perfectly. A casual conversation at an office gathering. A mention of a huge estate case being handled at Whitfield's firm. A name dropped without thinking. Claire. My name. Daniel had put the pieces together weeks before I ever planned to tell him. And instead of waiting for me to share the news, instead of trusting the woman he had spent 14 years with, he made a choice. He decided to secure his own future first and remove me from the picture before the money ever became legally mine. That is the moment I understood. This was never about love slipping away slowly. This was calculated. He wanted the marriage over and finalized before my inheritance was complete, so that when the money came in, I would already legally be his ex-wife, and he could still try to claim a portion of what he believed was coming, while keeping Patricia as his future. I felt something inside me shift that night. Not sadness anymore. Something colder, sharper, and far more useful. Which brings us back to that room, that folder, that moment of frozen silence. I had gone to finalize the last of my grandmother's estate documents, completely unaware that Daniel's forged divorce paperwork had already been processed through the county records 2 months earlier. The notary wasn't trying to hurt me. She was simply doing her job, cross-checking my marital status against public record before finalizing an inheritance document that asked whether I was single or married. 5 seconds of silence. And in those 5 seconds, I understood everything at once. Daniel hadn't just planned to divorce me. He had already succeeded, in the eyes of the law, using my forged signature, weeks before I ever knew about it. Then I made my move. I looked at the notary and said calmly, "Thank you for telling me. Please give me 1 moment." I stepped outside, called my own lawyer, and said 4 words that changed the direction of everything. "I need your help." Because here is what Daniel never understood about me. I might have been slow to see the betrayal, but once I saw it clearly, I did not waste a single second feeling sorry for myself. My lawyer, a sharp and quietly ferocious woman named Renata, listened to my story without interrupting once. When I finished, she said something I will never forget. "Claire, a forged signature on legal divorce paperwork isn't just unethical. It's a crime." Over the next 3 weeks, we built a case, piece by piece. We obtained the original divorce filing and had a handwriting expert compare my real signature to the one on the documents. It was not a match, and the report proved it clearly. We subpoenaed records from the county clerk showing exactly when and how the paperwork was filed. We found the notary who had supposedly witnessed my signature, and it turned out Daniel had used a different notary entirely, one who later admitted under questioning that she had never actually seen me in person that day. At the same time, my grandmother's estate lawyer, Mr. Whitfield, quietly froze the transfer of funds the moment I told him what was happening. He assured me the inheritance would remain fully protected until the legal mess with Daniel was resolved. Daniel had no idea any of this was happening. He believed his plan had worked perfectly. He believed the divorce was final, clean, and untouchable. He believed I still didn't know about Patricia, still didn't know about the forged papers, and still had no idea the money existed at all. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I invited Daniel to what he thought was a normal dinner at home. Our kids were staying at my sister's for the weekend. It was just the two of us, a quiet table, and a folder sitting beside my plate that he had not yet noticed. "You've seemed distant," he said, trying to sound casual. "Everything okay?" "Actually," I said, "I wanted to talk to you about something important. Something I've been planning to tell you for months." His face relaxed slightly, thinking perhaps this was good news. I slid the folder across the table. "My grandmother left me $35 million. I was going to surprise you with it. I had the paperwork ready to finalize 2 weeks ago." I watched color drain from his face. "But there was a problem," I continued, my voice steady. "The notary told me I couldn't finalize it as a married woman because apparently, according to county records, we've been divorced for 2 months. Which is strange, Daniel, because I never signed any divorce papers." He tried to speak, stammering something about paperwork mix-ups, about lawyers making mistakes. I placed the handwriting analysis report on the table next to the folder. "This report says the signature on the divorce filing isn't mine. It's a forgery. And Renata, my lawyer, has already filed a case with the county to have the entire divorce voided due to fraud." "Oh, and Patricia's name is a beneficiary on a life insurance policy you took out 3 months ago. Care to explain that too?" Daniel sat in silence, the same kind of silence I had once frozen in, except his lasted much longer than 5 seconds. Once the fraud was exposed, everything moved quickly. The forged divorce was legally voided, which meant, in the eyes of the law, Daniel and I were still married the entire time, which meant he had no legitimate claim through a fake divorce to any portion of what he believed was coming his way. Forging a legal signature on court documents is a serious criminal offense. Daniel faced formal charges for fraud and forgery. His employer, upon learning about the criminal case, quietly let him go, worried about the reputational risk of keeping him on staff. Patricia, once she learned that Daniel had been secretly planning both a fraudulent divorce and a financial future built on money that was never legally his, ended things with him almost immediately. It turned out she had no interest in being tied to a man now facing criminal charges. I filed for a real, legitimate divorce shortly after, this time with full legal protection around my inheritance. Because the fraudulent paperwork had been voided, my grandmother's fortune was never legally shared marital property to begin with, since it came to me through inheritance, and Daniel's attempted forgery had, ironically, made his own claim to any of it completely impossible. I kept the house for our children. I kept my grandmother's fortune fully protected. I built a foundation in her name that now supports young women starting their own businesses, something I know she would have loved. Daniel, last I heard, was living in a small apartment across town, working a much smaller job, still dealing with the legal consequences of what he tried to do. People ask me sometimes if I regret waiting to tell Daniel about the inheritance. I don't. If I had told him the moment I found out, he might have simply divorced me honestly and asked for half. Instead, his own greed and impatience led him to commit fraud, and that fraud is exactly what protected me in the end. Here's what I learned through all of this. Betrayal often hides behind patience. The people who plan to hurt you rarely announce it. They wait quietly, they calculate, they move pieces into place while you're busy trusting them completely. But the truth always finds its way to the surface eventually, sometimes in the most unexpected moment, sometimes from the mouth of a stranger doing nothing more than their job. That notary had no idea what she was doing when she looked up from her screen and said those words. She wasn't trying to save my life. She was just following protocol. But sometimes the universe uses the smallest, most ordinary moments to reveal the biggest truths. 5 seconds of silence changed everything for me. Not because I panicked, but because in those 5 seconds, I stopped being someone things happened to and became someone who decided what happened next. If there is one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Trust is important, but so is paying attention. And when the truth finally does show up, however it arrives, however painful it feels in that first frozen moment, don't waste your time on anger. Use it, because sometimes the calmest, most collected move you make in the face of betrayal is the one that ends up protecting everything you've worked for.